Good afternoon. If I could invite people to find a comfortable resting place, we're about ready to get underway. Wow, that never happens. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Pallas, Chair of the Department of Education Policy and Social Analysis at Teachers College. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this celebration in honor of Kevin Dougherty, Professor of Higher Education and Education Policy. Well, I joke that I first met Kevin 3 Manhattans ago. His first position was after finishing his PhD in sociology at Harvard, was in the sociology department at Manhattanville College. Not long after, he moved to the faculty of Manhattan College. And then in the fall of 2000, he arrived at Teachers College, an institution that Columbia University insists adjoins Manhattanville, the name it's given to its new colonial outpost in West Harlem. Joining the program in higher and post-secondary education in TC's Department of Organization and Leadership. Later, when TC created the Department of Education Policy and Social Analysis, or EPSA, Kevin split his time between the Education Policy Program in EPSA and the Higher and Post-Secondary Education Program, holding the title of Professor of Higher Education and Education Policy. An excellent title for Kevin, as his interests converged on the study of politics and public policy, the sociology of education, and higher education policy, garnering support along the way from the National Institute of Education, the National Science Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the Lumina Foundation, as well as a prestigious Fulbright scholarship to Birkbeck University of London. Kevin's early research sought to understand how community colleges work, and in the spirit of the best social science, he understood the community college as a social institution situated between macro-level economic, social, and political forces and the micro-level determinants of individual student stratification and attainment. His historical and comparative analyses of the development of the community college were at the heart of his book, The Contradictory College, The Conflicting Origins, Impacts, and Futures of the Community College, which won the Willard Waller Award for the best book in the sociology of education, published between 1994 and 1996. In contrast to the prevailing narratives, Kevin showed that government officials shaped the vocationalization of the community college, using community college expansion as a mechanism to keep public costs of higher education low and to promote local economic growth. His research provided new insights into why community college expansion and attendance had such varied effects on students and on the locales in which community colleges were situated. Kevin then turned to a newer, potentially troubling feature of the politics of higher education, the use of performance funding to finance public higher education. Roughly 30 states use performance funding, an accountability policy that ties a portion of a state's appropriation to a particular public college or university to student performance outcomes such as graduation rates or retention rates. As is often the case with policy implementation, the devil is in the details, and Kevin, with a team of talented student collaborators, explored the implementation of performance funding in a set of US states, illuminating the political origins of state-specific policies, implementation hiccups, and both intended and unintended outcomes. Kevin's work added a new sector to existing studies of accountability reforms in education. He found that incentive-based performance funding policies were rarely accompanied by capacity building, providing perverse incentives for institutions to weaken academic standards to boost retention and graduation rates, while restricting the admission of less prepared students. Kevin's work on performance funding has been showcased in an Association for the Study of Higher Education monograph, as well as 2 books published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Kevin has published books, journal articles, chapters, and reports with more than a dozen Teachers College students, a remarkable record of collaboration and mentorship. We'll hear a bit later from a few of the students who have benefited from his advising. He's widely known as a skilled and caring teacher, as attentive to those who face academic and personal challenges, as to those for whom graduate school comes easily. And as a department chair, I can attest to how seriously he has taken the responsibility of being a citizen of Teachers College. I now wish to introduce Tom Bailey, the 11th president of Teachers College, and the George and Abby O'Neill Professor of Economics and Education. In 1996, Tom founded the Community College Research Center, the nation's leading research development center focused on community colleges, and a host to much of Kevin's scholarship over the past 2 decades.
Thank you, Aaron. What a great pleasure it is to, although it's too bad you're leaving, so it's not that much of a pleasure, but it's a great pleasure to be really to celebrate your remarkable career at Teachers College and everywhere else. Although I must say, we've been colleagues since 1997, and aren't we just at the beginning of our career now? Maybe the middle, but we're certainly not at retirement age. So Kevin has been here since 2000. I was on the search committee. Were you on that search committee? You weren't. Yeah, I didn't think the timing worked. I remember meeting upstairs in what was UME at the time, although I think now it's a higher ed suite. And of course, by that time, Kevin was one of the 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 really most prominent community college scholars in the country. And since we had CCRC, I had a personal interest in recruiting Kevin. But the search committee didn't let me do that. But what they pointed out was that Kevin's really innovative use of sociological theory and concepts cast a new light on these neglected institutions, community colleges. So, we did get him to come here, but it wasn't just because he was was going to help out with the community college research. Now, CCRC started in 1996. So even though before Kevin was here, we got him to work at CCRC in 1997, I think is when he started. So he really was in at the beginning and sort of helped form the foundation of the work that we did there. Certainly his book, The Contradictory College, had a big influence on our thinking. And it really, of course, it's had a huge influence on all of thinking about community colleges. It talked about the role of vocational education, how that was related to the role of academic education and the transfer to get a bachelor's degree. There was the kind of diversion hypothesis, which suggested that community colleges tended to move people away from the bachelor's degree, so that was a controversy. I do think that the political argument, which Aaron emphasized, was actually, I think that has not had enough attention, or that part of that book, I think, could have had much more attention to that. Really, the first paper that we wrote at community, if you go to our website, a paper on the multiple missions of community colleges, really built on Kevin's concepts of the potential contradiction between the academic and vocational roles of the community colleges. So it's really hard to exaggerate the importance of that book. Just a review by Jerome Carabel, who's a picture of him up here. Dougherty's The Contradictory College is one of the most important books in the sociology of higher education to appear in the past decade. His distinctive theoretical perspective, applied in careful case studies of the important states of California, Washington, Illinois, and New York, sheds critical new light on the development of the community college over the past century. This is a sophisticated and challenging work that should be of interest not only to students of education, but also those who are interested in politics and organizational choice. Now, as Aaron said, that won the American Sociological Association's Willard Waller Award. By the way, the book is still in print. You can get it on Amazon, although I went and checked that out, so I didn't really believe that, but nevertheless, I have several copies myself, so I didn't have to indulge in that. Yes, okay. Of course, since then, Kevin has continued to be to do influential research in higher education around performance funding and accountability. access and equity, transfer to four-year colleges, and many more. He's been a prolific researcher and scholar, but I've always thought of Kevin as a consummate professor. He's been, prolific scholar and researcher, but he's never neglected his students. So, actually that was quite frustrating to me often because I'd want Kevin to come up and do some project on community college. And he'd say, well, I have a class. Or I have to meet some students. And I'm, what kind of priorities are those, Kevin? Really? Anyway, so on that note, here are some things that students have said about Kevin. One of Kevin's finest gifts is his ability to lead students without them knowing they're being led. Material from Kevin's classes sticks with his students long after the class is over. Any former student of Kevin's will tell you that the commentaries he assigns were a challenge, but learning how to write them well taught them how to be clear and concise and allowed them to remember the details of multiple stories of the policymaking process. Kevin is incredibly supportive. He is kind and is always willing to meet and talk or review what you've written. Kevin pushes you to challenge your assumptions until you arrive at a point you didn't know was possible. There are many more of those I could cite. So Kevin, you're leaving a huge legacy, and I'm grateful for all you have contributed to CCRC, to Teachers College, to the careers and accomplishments of so many Teachers College students, and in fact, so many community college students. I'm not sure why you're retiring so early. Nevertheless, I wish you a wonderful next chapter. You've been a great colleague and friend, and I will miss you, as will everyone at Teachers College. Thank you.
Now I'm pleased to welcome Stephanie Rowley, Provost, Dean, and Vice President for Academic Affairs, and Professor of Psychology and Education at Teachers College.
Good afternoon. Really excited to celebrate with Kevin today. So I haven't had a lot of experience with Kevin in terms of working, but everyone talks about what a kind, generous, thoughtful partner, colleague, professor you are. As Tom said, the consummate professor. So what I've heard from your colleagues is that what a dedicated teacher and advisor you are, how you care about your students. You're a proactive advisor who takes real interest in their lives and their academic and professional careers. So I think I emailed you one day. So many of you remember Lily, who worked in our office. And I think it was my very first semester, Lily was in Kevin's class. And so she would come back from class just aglow. And, she often talked about the kinds of things that Tom just pointed out, the sort of the reflection, the stories, and the encouragement, I think, really to think and reflect. And so I've caught up with her more recently in sort of trying to capture what those classes meant to her. And she said the most remarkable thing. She said that in Kevin's class, one of the things that she walked away with was hope. So she said, sometimes when you're talking about issues of equity and justice, you're left with the sense of despair at how difficult the world is. But she said Kevin had a way of using theory to give hope. And not just to give hope, but also to give levers, to give those kinds of connections that push the students to want to act. It wasn't enough to think. So she said this was the class that she reflected on the most, to Tom's point, but also it was the class where she was encouraged to act. And so Kevin's question was always, yeah, this is nice to think about, but what are you going to do? And so she always carried that with her in whatever practice she was doing. And then finally, that Kevin always had high expectations. So what I've always been told about Kevin is that he's nice and kind and generous. So I thought nice, kind, generous. And she said, oh no, he's a hard teacher. He is not easy. And in fact, has the highest of expectations and gives really critical feedback. So I think at a place like Teachers College, this is what we should all aspire to. So thank you for that example and certainly inspiration. So Erin did a wonderful job of sharing your incredible academic and intellectual contributions to the field. I think it's really exciting and encouraging to hear about how you included your students in so much of that work, and also your collaborators, who many of whom are here today. And on top of that, I hear you're a great colleague. So I've been told by your program colleagues that you're wonderfully collaborative, a great thoughtful presence at meetings, and a real intellectual partner. You played a critical role in getting the Ed Policy program on solid footing when you led it from 2016 to 2018. So yes, as Tom said, you are the consummate professor and scholar, and I am grateful for your presence here and for your wonderful example to all of us. So thank you for everything that you've contributed over the years, and we've been so lucky to have you, and congratulations on your early, apparently, retirement.
I'd like to welcome Carolyn Riehl, who is appointed in the Sociology in Education and Education Policy programs in EPSA, and who is the program director for the Education Policy program that has been Kevin's primary professional home for the last decade.
So I just want to offer some thanks to Kevin for all the many ways he has contributed to our program, our department, and our life together at TC. I have a really vague recollection of first getting to at least see Kevin at some social ed event many years ago where Aaron and Adam Gamaran and you were present, and thinking, who are all these guys? And it's been really great to get to know many of you in that intervening time. And of course, I knew your contributions to the sociology of higher education before I actually got to know Kevin. So when we both joined EPSA together, I mean, we sort of had interactions before while we were still in ORL together. But when EPSA was formed and we became much closer colleagues, I came to know Kevin as the consummate yes man. And I mean that in a really complimentary way, because Kevin never said no. When there was something to be done, he was willing to do it on behalf of students, on behalf of the program. It was always wonderful to ask Kevin for help because he never really refused. And as Stephanie said, he served as our program coordinator for a couple of years during some, you know, we argue a lot in that program. We sort of wrestle over details, and he was a wonderful navigator for that. Sometime in the process of one of his, I think it must have been one of his promotion reviews, I had an opportunity to observe his teaching. And that was a really wonderful experience for me. Before I visited his class, we had a conversation, and you know, I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint, but I use it because I think that sort of doubles the impact for students to have a visual and a verbal. And Kevin was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. And I sort of went into the class thinking, this is going to be an old-fashioned teaching moment that I'm going to observe. It was a wonderful teaching moment. He knew how, he didn't use PowerPoint, he didn't write anything on the board. He absolutely wanted students to take notes for themselves, which is something not all of our students know how to do anymore. But he showed me the paper that he used as a kind of guide for the class session. He had a really absolutely well-formulated plan for what he wanted to accomplish in the class. He knew what his little mini lecture was going to be like. He knew the questions he was going to ask students. He moved them into groups that he had very deliberately chosen. He visited each group, and to my amazement, that did not stop the conversation in the groups. They just kept going, even though he was there. I came away thinking, this is a person who really understands teaching and does it well. So that was wonderful to see. I have a 95-year-old mom out in Cleveland who wishes that her 4 children, she's a big booster of the local community college, and wishes that all of her children had only gone to the local college and never left home. And I'd love for Kevin to meet her, give her some perspective on community college. But you know, that work you've done has been so central to that field. But I also want to offer a really personal thank you to Kevin for being a wonderful intellectual partner as we have shared a department over the last 10 years or so. Maybe more than anybody else in the department. Kevin has been someone I've had very interesting, extended, fun conversations with. We started out talking about community colleges. We've talked about white supremacy. We've talked about critical theory. We've talked about social movements. As he has developed new courses, he's brought me into that conversation. One time I had to drive to Cleveland to see my mom, and he entertained me almost from here to the Delaware Water Gap in a phone conversation. I really kept me awake, and it was just a lot of fun. And I have so enjoyed our conversations over the years, and really thank you for that intellectual partnership. We are going to miss you. I hope you won't be totally absent from EPSA, but certainly we wish you and your family all the best in this new phase of your life. Thank you. I wanted to say one more thing. Kevin used to show up in my little corner of the EPSA office late in the afternoon as we got to Thursday and Friday. But I think Lyle is going to be joining us, and maybe he can explain more about that.
Here is Noah Dresner, Professor of Higher Education and Program Director for TC's Program in Higher and Post-Secondary Education.
Thank you. It's really hard to go after everyone who already shares all the reasons why we love you, because it's going to sound like a broken record, but I think that there's definitely themes. There's themes to not only the amazing scholarship that you have done, but your care and thought in mentorship and service and teaching that has impacted all of us, and certainly our students. And I just think about, in the higher and post-secondary education program, we have a small sliver of your time. But when I think about whether you reach that amount, it's not a question because you surpass it. There's no question in my mind that you do more than you owe us technically for our students, whether it is the classes that you teach directly in our program or the classes that are technically in the EPSA program that all of our students take and learn from, or the guidance when there's a problematic student, or the times that we ask you to read comprehensive exams or be third readers on comprehensive exams when there's a problematic student. You're always there and you always say yes. And as Carolyn was talking about first memories, I doubt that you actually remember this. I shared this with Anna just the other day. Our first interaction was in Vancouver, British Columbia at Ash on the line for the taxi to go to the airport. I was a young assistant professor at the University of Maryland, and you and Anna were standing in front of me waiting for a taxi to go to the airport for us to fly home. And you immediately turned around and said, "Hi, I don't know you, but," and I think I had my tag on it, I had assistant professor, "you probably don't have a lot of professional development funds. Why don't you join us in the cab and TC will pay?" And who knew that I was going to be here and then later on be a faculty member looking at the budget and how it's spent. But but it's that care for individuals that I think is emblematic, right? That was an easy, small gesture that certainly did not have to happen, but is emblematic of who you are and what you do. There's so much to be thankful for. I could thank you for my office that you vacated so I could have it, which I do thank you for very much. But also the way that you teach and what you do for our students. I can't tell you the number of times I have students who are coming in, either my advisees or others' advisees who try to come to the program director to say, "I hear that Professor Dougherty's class is really difficult. what can I do to not do that required course? It happens a lot. And I'm like, listen, you can do it. It's going to be hard. The reflection papers are difficult. You get a lot of feedback, but everyone survives, from what I can tell. But so that's more often than not a conversation that I have, but almost to the T, every student that had come into my office to have that conversation to me comes back at the end of the semester, thanking me for being not willing to let them out of the class because of the amount that they learned from you. And not only in the sociology of higher education and who comes to our field and who comes to our institutions, but in the skills that they take in being able to articulate, write, and argue their positions. So thank you for that. And the one last thing that I think that is also emblematic of who you are and what we should all strive to be is that you're not just a scholar, but you walk the talk too. Your interest in social movements in higher education are not just the scholarly aspects of it and wanting to teach about them and make sure that is part of our curriculum, but it's actually the action of doing that as well. Whether it is emails coming at all sorts of hours talking about making sure that TC's commitment to sustainability is not just in words, but in action, or conversations about how we as faculty could be supporting doctoral students across the street that technically we are not part of, right? But how we can support them, make sure that they get their ends met and that they are equal members of the academic community. It was always your email first, and then people responding. So thank you for being that leader. Thank you for showing us how to walk the talk, how to teach our students, and how to always be there. And thanks for the taxi ride and the office.
Our next speaker was to be Selena Cardona, who holds a master's degree in education policy from EPSA and is a current PhD student in our sociology and education program. Selena had the bad luck to be exposed to COVID on Monday and is unable to be here, but I'm going to read her remarks. Close your eyes and picture a Bronx-born Latina first-generation college student. In the fall of 2018, I walked into Teachers College as a master's student in the EPSA department. I knew that my goal was to learn as much as I could possibly learn from as many people as possible. Education is a field that has had a substantial impact on my life, but I hadn't yet refined my interests or understood where I wanted to make the biggest impact. One of the people that I learned from the most was Professor Dougherty. I remember taking Kevin's courses and thinking, wow, these are interesting concepts, or wow, I am learning so much from my colleagues. Through his courses and his pedagogical approach, I learned many new ways of formulating questions, thinking of research as an agent of change, and looking to the past to learn how to best move the field forward. One of the most important things that I've also learned is learning how to exchange ideas and learn from my colleagues as well. One of the things that I admire the most about Kevin is how great he is at taking dense sociological concepts and situating them in the present. I will always remember the formative experience of working on an independent study with Kevin. Kevin very graciously allowed me to leverage his knowledge, and if it weren't for this tutorial experience, I know that I would not be where I am today. In this independent study, I not only learned basic foundational concepts in sociology, but on a more practical level, I learned how to confidently approach my writing at the level of a doctoral student and not be intimidated by the writings of very established scholars. More importantly, I also oriented myself on how to have conversations with professors, discuss and exchange ideas, and have my point of view challenged in a way that has really impacted my professional growth. Kevin, I know I speak for all your present and former students when I say that you will be very missed. Thank you for your time, for prioritizing service, and for serving as a guide and resource for many of us. Enjoy your well-deserved retirement. Again, you'll be truly missed. We now have, I'll call it a montage, queued up 4 pre-recorded videos from people who were unable to be here. I'm just going to briefly introduce them, and then we'll have the 4 videos displayed. First is Tom Brock, research professor in EPSA and the current director of the Community College Research Center. Then Lyle Yorks, a good friend to EPSA and professor emeritus of adult and continuing education at Teachers College. Then Rebecca Natow, who received her doctorate in higher and post-secondary education from TC under Kevin's direction and is assistant professor of specialized programs in education at Hofstra University. And then DeMonta Morgan, an MA graduate of the Education Policy Program at TC, who has just completed his JD at Columbia Law School, working as an appellate litigator in the Civil Division of the U.S. Department of Justice.
Hello, Kevin. I'm so happy to be part of this occasion, at least virtually, to wish you well on this occasion of your retirement. I just want to say from the outset, there's been so much that you have contributed to the field of community college research. Certainly the book that you produced on the Contradictory Community College was one of the first in-depth examinations of community colleges and just went so far to help us really understand the complexity of these institutions and why it is they so often fail to live up to our highest expectations or dreams for what they should be able to do for their students they serve. In what I think of as classic Kevin Dougherty fashion, your book brings together historical information, data on student performance, social science theory, really manages to integrate so many ideas and so many different strands into this cohesive whole. And I know when I got started in this field, it was my first textbook, the piece of literature I referred to most often. Secondly, Kevin, I just want to thank you really more from a personal level for how much you've done for me, how much you've done for other people working in this field of community college research, certainly many of the graduate students that I've gotten to know during my time at Teachers College. Perhaps more than anyone else that I have come across in my time here, you really embody the notion of what I think of as the teacher scholar. You just have been so generous with your time, making yourself available to answer questions big and small from students, from other faculty members, from people in the field working directly in community colleges. I love the way you're always able to make connections to other literature, to other ideas, to other people. Every time I talk to you, you give me a list of suggestions of things I should do next. You've managed to keep me very busy in that way. But you've also been so helpful in providing feedback on things that we've written or ideas that we might be considering for new proposals. So on this eve of your retirement, I just want to really wish you well. I also want to say the door is wide open at CCRC. I'm envisioning all that extra time you'll have on your hands in your retirement. We would love to bring you back in to write blogs, to work with us on a study, to help us think about that next proposal. So just please know we're more than happy to help you fill that free time. Best of luck.
Hi, Kevin. As a colleague and friend, I offer my best wishes for a good and well-deserved transition to the next phase of your life. Looking back, I thank you for all the valuable contributions to the Teachers College community that you made over the past couple of decades in terms of your scholarship regarding social and racial inequality and the dynamics of social change, your service to the college, and the direction and the ongoing development that you have provided to students. Speaking personally, I miss being able to walk across the hall and pop into your office for a brief chat. Your research and your perspectives on the political dynamics of policy have never been more relevant than they are today. I have personally enjoyed our conversations regarding social movements, looking at them both from a historical and a contemporary perspective. along with the various discussions we've had regarding organizations and looking at that through the sort of sociological lens, so to speak, which we both share. And of course, stepping back, sometimes we have disagreed when our conversations turned to the Yankees and the Red Sox. However, I do say that I respect the way that you were willing to recognize that you were wrong when we've had those conversations. Actually, humor has always been a good part of the exchanges that we've had. So turning back to a more serious point, one thing that has really impressed me over the years was observing the rigor you expect your students to apply to their work, while at the same time being very supportive of them. The way in which you are able to provide that sort of balance, it's very clear to me how they have been engaged. And that was one of the things that I would observe sometimes when I would pop into the office. On the other side, I also always enjoyed you coming over to my office, and again having some ongoing conversations about the events that were happening at the time. Those are very good and very serious conversations and very worthwhile. And I look forward to being able to actually continue them going forward. And I know we will be able to do that periodically, but nowhere near the kind of frequency that we had in the past. But again, I thank you for all of the contributions you made to the TC community through your dedicated work. You are a great friend and colleague, so enjoy today's event. I apologize for not being able to attend in person, but I will toast you with a Starbucks coffee. I'm actually recording this at 1 p.m, so it is a cup of coffee. So, okay, take care. And again, thank you so much. Bye.
Hi, Kevin. I'm so sorry I'm not able to attend your retirement party in person, but I teach on Wednesday evenings. And it's ironic because the reason I have this job is a result of your many years of mentoring, teaching, and constant support, just going above and beyond the call of duty for me and for many others who were your students at Teachers College. I consider myself very lucky to have learned so much from you over the years. I'm grateful for all the opportunities you gave me, such as being your course assistant, which is how I learned how to teach graduate students, and being a member of your research teams, where you gave me and other research assistants many opportunities to take the lead on various aspects of research. You've always been so very generous with your time. From the time I was a graduate student and even now, whenever I've needed career advice or research advice, you've always been there. And I try to pay that forward to my students now. But also, and this is very important, I cannot thank you enough for the accommodations you provided when I was a new parent of a disabled child. I was finishing up my dissertation, and I truly thought that after that, my days of being a researcher were over. This was around the time that you received funding for the second performance funding study. And although I had great experience as a research assistant on the first study, I thought I would not be able to work on your second study because I could no longer commute into the city on a regular basis. And this was long before our current era, back when no one had ever heard of Zoom meetings and when remote work was much less common than it is now. You allowed me to be a full participant on that research team, attending meetings by phone, by Skype, and by being there when I could, without facing pressure to be there all the time. Let me tell you, that may have seemed like a reasonable accommodation, but it was a really big deal. And it kept my career on track at a time when it could have easily been derailed. I've been able to do the work that I do now in large part because you allowed me to be part of that research team at a time that was critical for my career and in a way that was workable and beneficial for my family. And I cannot thank you enough for that. There's so much more that I could say, but in the interest of time, let me just close with this. Kevin, your research and your scholarship have been highly influential in the field and will continue to be highly influential. But your teaching, your mentoring, going the extra mile for your students, that may be even more influential. Without your mentoring and support, I would not be where I am today. And there are so many other students of yours in similar positions. So thank you, a million times, thank you. And I wish you all the best in retirement.
Oh my gosh, Kevin, I can't believe the day is finally here where you're going to be retiring and leaving Teachers College. That's crazy to me. Because when I was applying to Teachers College and thinking about coming there, you were sort of a constant from the day I got accepted, and we began talking about what my experience there would look like and what it would mean to participate in class discussions and opportunities that I would have after Teachers College. And the fact that you're leaving, I think, is definitely a loss to Teachers College, but also I feel a personal loss, though I'm sure that we will remain in each other's lives. So I just wanted to talk about how much I have come to adore and respect you, and some of the stories that come to mind when I think about who you are and sort of the role that you've played in my life and experience so far. The first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the classroom experience. And so you'll remember this because we've talked about it before. But your class was one of my favorite classes at Teachers College. And it was also one of the hardest classes that I had at Teachers College, which was a bit surprising to me. Because in my head, I was thinking, okay, this is Kevin, he knows me, I know him, he's my advisor, like, he's gonna make this easy on me. And that just was not the case at all. And I remember we had to do these like reading response papers, and I submitted my paper and I thought, well, that's a good paper. He'll like that, I'm sure. Of course, I could have done better on it probably, but I was thinking, Kevin's love for me will temper whatever lacks of this paper. And I remember getting the paper back and seeing just how much you had written on it and how much you had destroyed it. Is what I thought at the time. And I thought, wow, this man doesn't love me at all. And I just thought that was so funny. Reflecting back on that, I now know that that was because you actually did care about me and about all of us, because it wasn't just my paper that you did like that. You took what we were saying seriously, and you engaged with it, and you tried to help us improve the arguments or the policy proposals that we were making in those papers. And that, of course, made us better. And I have some of those papers now, and I look back from some of the first papers I submitted to some of the later papers that I submitted, and how the analysis sort of changed throughout those papers to become better. And that was, of course, because you pushed us to do that and engage more with the material. And so I love thinking about just how much you pushed me in both a personal and an academic setting. And I just love and thank you for that. The next thought that sort of comes to my mind is, not only were you engaging with us in class, but you sort of created opportunities for us to have conversations and to engage outside of class as well. For me, that looked a little bit different because you knew that at that time I was interested in politics. And I just love that you gave me the opportunity to come out to New Jersey, to meet your family, and then to campaign with you guys for a campaign that you were working on. And that just meant so much to me because I got experience doing something that I thought I would want to do long term, and I was happy to be doing that with you, which is who is a person that I respected so much. So I know this is the end of your journey at Teachers College, but I want you to know that I am going to continue to pester you. I'm going to continue to want to get dinners at Le Mans whenever I'm in town. I'm going to continue to call on you for advice. And I know that this next chapter is going to bring some exciting things for you and your family. And I cannot wait to see what happens.
Finally, the man of the hour. Here's Kevin Dougherty.
Well, folks, thank you so much for being here. And I so deeply appreciate the remarks that you made. They're very meaningful. I wanted to thank also the people who took the time to attend, those here in person, including my brother John, my niece Rebecca, my wife Beth, our sister Maren, our daughter Julia, who can't be here in person but are attending on Zoom, and those who spoke and those who are here. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank the speakers for focusing on my virtues and ignoring my derelictions. I still remember a little bit of my Plato, so I thank you for your noble lies, and for focusing on that. If you wouldn't mind indulging me in a couple of things, I just wanted to make a couple of remarks about two things. One is the experience of being a faculty member and what it meant to me. The second thing was to talk about the communities that have nurtured me. As a researcher and as a teacher and advisor in service, those three things were deeply meaningful to me. As a researcher, I think I was really very concerned with trying to understand the sources and impacts of social and educational policies to combat social inequality and oppression, whether it's class or race or gender or sexuality. That to me was absolutely fundamental in driving what I wanted to do. And it informed the long arcs of my interests. My interest in community colleges is both democratizing but also stratifying institutions. My interest in performance funding is a mechanism of accountability, but also an engine of producing quite considerable side effects. My interest in choice is both an exercise of freedom, but also a legitimation of inequality. And it's that fundamental yin-yang that has run throughout my work, which is another way of saying that I'm a profoundly ambivalent person. and you can see it in my work. For teaching, I think what really meant a lot to me is to have students become critical thinkers. I mean, that was the key legacy for me of the 60s and early 70s, that we rose to really value critique. That was really important to me. I wanted to produce engaged, critical citizens and policymakers, not just critical, because I do not like critique if it's not met with action. So engaged and having people do it. And I'm hoping that that's something my students felt that I did. And I really firmly and very powerfully believed in discussion as a form of learning critique and learning self-knowledge. And it became very important to me as a teacher. And it may have been helped by the fact that I was not so good as a lecturer, so I had best do discussion. And finally, service to me was always very important. I mean, the idea of shared governance of higher education and the role of the faculty in it was deeply important to me, and therefore very important that I take a full role in it, that one cannot ask to have a voice in running an institution if you do not meet the demands involved in doing that. So that meant stepping up. And for me, it had an additional pleasure in that faculty committees were places where I could meet faculty members all across this institution, and therefore, in effect, engage in meeting people in different disciplines and getting that difference in perspective and conversation that meant a lot to me. So that traditional division has always been very meaningful to me, and I hope I carried it out well. I wanted to thank the communities that have nurtured me, because I think of my family, nuclear and extended, my wife Beth, our daughter Julia, Gotham, Julia's companion. I want to thank them as my life companions, because I see them as throughout my life, along with my brother and sister and their spouses and children, and all three of them as my fellow social engineers. And that I'm directing to Gotham particularly because he's an engineer who's deeply interested in sociology, and therefore he and Julia connect at a deep level. So we're the three of us as sociologists has been very meaningful. And for our extended family, my siblings, my sister-in-law, our cousins, their spouses and children, they have been a great source of support. I think of their love, their constancy, their curiosity, and their humor. They've been my anchor and my delight. So, thank you. I wanted to thank also my friends from college, graduate school, professional work, and living in Highland Park, because our friendship networks mean so much. I think all of us will testify to that. I thank them for the way they fill my life with enjoyable conversation, important ideas, many jokes. That's very important, and good food. And that may be more important than I should realize. And I want to give a particular shout out to my graduate school comrades and lifelong friends from the Huron Institute. The research project and study group that we created at early graduate school helped me survive graduate school, has informed me throughout, and has enriched my life throughout. And you see those people, they're the people that were in that group. Steve Brent, Jerry Carabell, David Swartz, David Karen, Catherine McClellan. And finally, two more groups that are really important to me. My students. I think what I have so much enjoyed about teaching and working on dissertations and papers and research projects with students is that it's been a voyage of discovery. Often I get into areas I don't know much about, and I learn so much from them. And I think about how much I learned about the politics of educational rulemaking, something I didn't know much about. I learned through working on a graduate student thesis. In-state tuition for undocumented students, the college success movement, the determinants of college access and completion, massive online courses and their vicissitudes, higher education in India, Chile, China, Thailand, Haiti, Latino parents and their college student children, college outreach programs, student learning outcomes assessment, institutional research in community college, lobbying for higher education in prison, civic education in high school, race and school discipline policies, charter schools and parent engagement, teacher unionism. I've learned so much from my students. And finally, I wanted to thank my TC faculty and staff colleagues, particularly Liz Farley at this moment, and Gosha Kolb and Catherine Chung, who've done so much for us over the years and organized this event and working with other colleagues, but also my faculty colleagues in EPSA, Higher Ed, the Community College Research Center, Adult Learning, International Education, the Faculty Executive Committee, and other TC committees. You've given me the great pleasure and occasional aggravation, I must admit, of collaborative work on important issues with smart and dedicated people. That has been a great source of pleasure, and I really thank you for that. Lau Yorks has been also, it is very interesting to think about how one has interchanges with someone. I learned a lot from Lau as a member of the Adult Learning Program. And what he hinted at but didn't quite say is that I would head to Lau's office every Thursday after class and have a scotch with him. And we continue every other week now on Zoom to have scotches. So, and by the way, a variety of scotches. So in any case, thank you all deeply for being here, for what you've done to enrich my life, personal and professional, and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
That concludes the formal portion of our program. There is food and drink, and please enjoy.